Yeah, we're live. Live 5. Got my wrong cam shirt on. All good. Got my fluffy jacket on. How's everybody doing? Today I want to talk about IR manifolds. So individual runner stuff, which can be a couple of different things. Traditionally, an IR manifold has a lot of guys focus on different things for these things. And my point is that does the thing that they focus on really matter? For an individual runner intake manifold, you have throttle blades in each cylinder. So each stack, like if you have these stacks on there, like the thumbnail that I'm showing, that's on a small block Ford, I think. I think that was a 408 stroker, 351 Windsor base motor. And that one was from the guys at Speedmaster. And then obviously you can, I would argue that the ones that the racing series that made these the most famous would be the Can-Am stuff. So you had the big Hillborn, Crowder stacks and all that on the big blocks primarily running in Can-Am, which made them look awesome because that's like super cool. And the cool thing with those is not only do they look amazing, but you can also change the stack length. And as we know, the stack length basically is just the same thing as it's the runner. So changing the runner length. With an IR manifold, one of the things a lot of people don't realize is you have essentially an infinite plenum volume. So there's no common plenum joining these unless you enclose them in some sort of box. I remember having this discussion when I was testing the TWM stuff on my B series Honda. And they said, yeah, we have, the guys from TWM said, hey, we have this, what is basically kind of an air cleaner enclosure, but it's a base plate and then a lid that goes over the top of it. Not unlike if you think about the top of a high ram, it does the same thing, that bolts on top with a throttle opening. This just has an opening because obviously the throttles are down in the individual stack. So it just has an opening. And then you can run a duct, which is cool, from that over to a cold air source, which is a fantastic idea. And my argument with them, or at least my comment, we didn't argue, was, okay, if you do that, that is no longer an IR manifold. It's no longer the what I would call an individual runner intake manifold, because now it's a common plenum manifold, because you've enclosed everything, and now you have things that are happening. Now you have a plenum volume that's resonating at a certain frequency. And so it's not really an IR manifold anymore. And so it will react accordingly. And it did. It did change the power output. As it has with every time I've tested any kind of, IR manifold that has a common plenum on it. The one from Performance Design comes to mind when I tested that thing on the LS. They have a carbon fiber one that they did that has individual blades on it. And we ran that, and we were able to. Well, I take that back. It did not have an individual blades on it. It had a front-mounted throttle body, and then the plenum lid that bolted on top of it. And what we did was we ran it, went to wide open throttle on the normal throttle body, and then I just took the lid off, and made it run as an IR manifold. We also did that same thing on an FR500 intake manifold for a modular Ford deal. So we ran it, went to wide open throttle. Because if you're not at wide open throttle, there's a lot of vacuum holding that lid on. But as soon as you go to wide open throttle, it goes to zero vacuum or very, very near there. And then you can just pull the lid off. And then now it's operating, unencumbered. It has infinite plenum volume, all the plenum volume basically in the dyno cell. And then acts differently than it does when it has a plenum. And every time I've done that, it makes more power without the plenum on there, acting as an IR manifold. One of the things that people focus on is not the plenum volume, not the stack length, which we know changes power dramatically, but they focus on the fact that it has individual blades. And actually, I would argue that having individual blades would have more surface area for blades and create more of an airflow, hindrance than just having a single blade there. You have to do the math on that to figure that out to see if that's the case. But, does that hurt performance from an airflow standpoint? But that's not even the focus. The focus really for most people is that, when we have individual blades and those blades traditionally are closer to the valve, closer to the cylinder head, we get much better response. But my question is on that, first of all, does that change the power output? So if you go to wide open throttle on the manifold and you're running from, like we do on the engine dyno, you're running from 2,000 to 7,000 RPM, let's say. Let's say you do a really long sweep on it. Does the position of that throttle have any effect on power? No, it doesn't. That's the answer. We know that that's the case. It does not have an effect on power. Because once you're at wide open throttle, the blades are just, if there's blade in the way, there's blade in the way. And that's, as long as it's not going over centered or anything weird is happening. But the position of that valve relative to the cylinder head doesn't change the power output. All of that's dictated by the runner diameter, the length, the fact that it doesn't have a plenum, as we've talked about. That's what dictates the power output. So that blade position does nothing. The argument in favor of this, and this is one that I agree with, is that because you can test this and see that this actually happens, and that's that when you open the blade, when you go from when you go from a closed blade to an open blade, this inertial column of air goes down and fills the cylinder quicker than it would if you had a blade that was, in front of the big common plenum. I don't agree that that air that's in front of the throttle body has to then make its way down there before you get response. Because I think that what happens is the draw is from the common plenum and then the throttle body fills that. But let's assume that even happens. Let's assume that your air molecule that you're getting is in front of the throttle body, and it's in front of the throttle body on the individual stacks. And so it's a much shorter distance from the opening in the stacks down to get into the thing to make power. Let's assume that that's true. Just it's easier to visualize that, and then it gives us a greater distance to talk about, because we want to talk about these in extreme conditions because it's just a lot easier to do. So if we look at that and we have better throttle response, it hits the converter harder. If we have better throttle response, where is that beneficial? So immediately you would think, okay, road racing, because we're on and off the throttle a lot and we get back on the throttle. We also know that it doesn't affect the acceleration rate of the vehicle once you're at wide open throttle. So once you're at wide open throttle, the power output's dictated by the other things. It's dictated by the stack length. It's dictated by the flow of the system. It's dictated by the fact that you don't have a plenum, hopefully. And so that power output, so the acceleration rate of your vehicle at wide open throttle is dictated by the power output and the weight and the aerodynamic drag and all that stuff. It has nothing to do with throttle placement. So we have a narrow window of when throttle placement, the benefit of throttle placement being closer to the valve, has an effect. It's that initial time from on off. It's initial time for our molecule to start from in front of the big throttle body in front of the plenum to where it starts to in each one of the individual things. We know, and it's very cool, that when we do, people like to judge the motor by a free rev. So everybody likes a motor that's, really quick and responsive, wing, 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 that it just zings up. That's really cool. It is awesome. And they think that because the motor accelerates quicker like that, that makes the motor accelerate the car quicker. But again, once you're at wide open throttle, the power curve dictates the power curve versus whatever is resisting that power, the weight and the aerodynamics and the gearing, is what dictates the acceleration rate of the vehicle. It's not the zinginess of the motor. The zinginess of the motor, you could argue that that's demonstrated in the power curve, because when we use lightweight components and stuff, depending on which method we're using to test it, we can register that as power. We could see that as a change because it's, there's less resistance to rotation in this thing, and that's we can show that as equaling power. But so my question is, in this narrow range of on throttle to off throttle or off throttle to on throttle, do we see a gain in that initial acceleration rate going from off throttle to on throttle? And having done a lot of road racing, we want a responsive motor. We want it to be as responsible as possible. Again, given within the limitations of traction, because when we have high horsepower road race cars, which there are a lot of, if you put a big motor in a Corvette or whatever, and it's a slow speed corner, you're not going to just be able to mash it. Which in road racing you don't do that anyway. You roll onto the throttle anyway. All the inputs, whether throttle, braking, all that stuff, need to be relatively smooth. That's better to not upset the car so much. And particularly if you have a vehicle that has a lot of power, rolling onto the throttle in a traction limited situation is definitely the way to go. So if you're rolling on the throttle, I would say that limits the benefit of the added response rate from individual throttles. I don't want this to sound like I'm against individual throttles. I'm for them. I think that they're awesome. I think you look at any BMW M series motor that has the individual throttle or any stack injection or any of these things, and they're awesome. I'm just trying to get a handle on quantitatively how much of a gain are we getting and under what. So you guys let me know in the comments, how much of a gain are we getting and under what circumstances are we getting this gain on these individual blades? Because like I said, it's not the power curve, it's not the acceleration rate of the vehicle. It's only in that limited transition from not having like your full decel basically under braking, and then you roll back onto the throttle at whatever point you're rolling back onto the throttle. Maybe it's pre-apex, maybe it's at the apex, maybe it's after the apex, and you're rolling back onto the throttle, transitioning out to the, exiting out to the farther edge of the track, dropping two wheels off, maybe if you're really drifting it just right, and rolling onto the throttle, and then going down whatever length of that next straightaway is. So how much of a benefit is that worth in that limited amount of transition time and area? And if we're looking for 100th of a second, or maybe at each turn, and you add that up, or if it's a 10th of a second at each turn, that would be awesome, because then you're talking about, it being on a 10-turn track, which is not unusual at all. You're talking about it being a second. And a second a lap is forever. Even a 10th is a lot. So when you're looking for hundreds, and tenths is a lot, you're looking for thousands or hundreds or a 10th, cumulative for all of the track, maybe there's something there. You guys let me know what you think. Oh, somebody mentioned the 4AG motors. I like those too. And the Atlantic stuff, that was very, very cool. Okay, is there a benefit from individual throttle blades on a stack injection versus common plenum? Versus a common plenum. Let me know. Let me know what you guys think. But how much? That's what I want to know. So if you guys haven't, well, first of all, shout out to the guys at Brian Tooley Racing. Awesome. I love Brian and all the people out of BTR, AFR, and the guys from SCAD and Vortec and Race Tech Pistons and stuff. All of those guys. Fantastic. Thank you guys for all the help over the years. And then obviously RichardHolderPerformance.com. Guys, go out and we've got cams. We got the low buck truck and the Truck Plus injectors now and stuff. And then going in 2025, looks like should be a growth year for us, which is good. And we're trying to add tools. It should come, I think, in January, and then turbos too we're working on, and then packages. We're going to put together some 400, 500 horsepower, whatever, 600, 1200, whatever horsepower packages. So those will be good. I'm ready and waiting. Questions. Would running a Hellcat supercharger allow me to retain emissions legal over turbo? Let's say no, because technically, to be emissions legal, you have to have that thing certified. So you'd have to go through the certification process to take any sort of other supercharger that was not original equipment and get it certified to do that. Scotty doesn't know. Scotty doesn't know. Somebody tell me what movie that's from. So don't tell Scotty. Let's see the data. There we go. Prestige. Man, they run fine. Let's see the data that says otherwise. They are trash. Just something to look at. I don't think there's that. We know that they're awesome. We know that they work. They work very, very well in Can-Am. They work very well on every BMW M Series motor and any other OEM like the 4AG that somebody mentioned. Those were fantastic. I love the little Toyota Atlantics. My grandpa used to build front engine sand rails. Oh, very cool. He would use Oldsmobile 455 big blocks, big old paddle tires on the back, pop wheelies at a tap. There you go. Tapping the throttle. On a front engine one too. So getting wheelies on a front engine sand rail is different. It's a lot harder than the rear engine ones. Work at Amazon currently. So I have 10 hours a day to listen and watch the videos. Absolutely, dude. Nice. Is the Amazon on strike? I thought that they were on strike somewhere. Comes down to the pressure dynamics of the motor, or should I say positive, negative, or neutral ram tuning of the runners. I've run side drafts in my Toyota 4AGs. Yeah, those work good. Because of that, we should do a trivia live stream. You ask us questions and see if we've been listening. There you go. Jimmy and I talked a little bit about that. I've changed trumpet length. That definitely works. We've done a lot of stack length changes on the dyno. In fact, I even made just some Super Richie quickie ones for the stacks that I ran on this Hemi. You could see it's one of the books that I did. So we ran those stacks, and what I did was take these off, and I just slid. I had aluminum tubes that I made that we just flared the end over at the muffler shop guy let me do the flaring, and we just flared the ends of them, and they just slid inside there. So they're actually a little bit smaller OD than those were, and we just slid them in, and I just kind of taped them and zip tied them in place. And then that way we could just change the stack length without having to have those particular things or remachining them or anything. We just put them in there and make them longer. Like, hey, look, longer stacks, make more power down low, or through some part of the RPM range that's lower than that stack length was. So that always happens. So you can tune the RPM range that you want, definitely with runner length. Mickey Thompson set FIA records with IR Hillborn injection, naturally aspirated and supercharged Pontiac V8. I don't recall him ever racing with a carburetor except original super stock drag races. Super Richie low buck truck, big block Chevy cam. I don't have any big block Chevy stuff. Formula Atlantic Series and the Indy Lights run the Toyota 4AGs with individual throttle bikes. I love those. They sounded cool, and I liked watching those races. I raced at the Long Beach Grand Prix when we were a support series when I ran Bridgestone Supercar, and the Atlantics were there. And that was back when like Little Al was racing there. So it was a little while ago. We tested a barrel style throttle with a Plenum on our KAW drag bike. It had the same inside diameter and length, but on wide open throttle, we picked up 5/10 1/4. So the blades do restrict. Yeah, if it's a flow issue, you particularly like with anything in any throttle body size, if you're at a point where the throttle opening and in this case the blade too is restrictive in airflow, and you can improve the airflow by whatever means, taking the blade out obviously is good. My friend Tom that used to work at West Tech has a slide valve setup that he's made, and so hopefully we'll be doing some testing on that. That'll be cool. Getting in debates about port velocity, acceleration rate, often not seen on a dyno, but actual vehicle installed and racing away. So tell me how the velocity inside the motor changes on an engine dyno versus in the car. Great overall explanation. Speaking as a road racer, fast transients are generally good. Slow throttle roll on after the apex is a great example. Yeah, it's nice to have instant, if you could, like, if you think about what it would be like to drive the extreme one, and this is why they had to change the transmissions and develop a system to change their whole, basically, transmission, were when they were doing the diesel Audis for Le Mans, which they won many times. But if the transmissions wouldn't last for the whole 24 hours. So they're like, okay, well, we can't get this working. We can't make it strong enough to handle the kind of torque and power that these things are making. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a transmission change. We're going to change the whole back half of the car. And so they figured out a way to do that in, I don't know. I think Bernie said it was a minute 45 or something. It was ridiculous because everything's on QDs and they just come in and unbolt everything, bolt it back up. The suspension is all set up exactly the same. The brakes are all bedded. Everything's ready to go. And so they just come in and did that. That was just their service stop, except they're changing the transmission, which was legal at Bonneville. So that's a fantastic way of, hey, look, we could keep trying to engineer a transmission that will last, and that's really expensive and time consuming. Or somebody else said, hey, I have an idea. Raise your hand. Since we know that they'll last 18 hours and not 24 hours, let's just put another transmission in. We're really good at changing those. And if we practiced that and made it so that this was the thing, we could get really good at it. And they did. I remember because my buddy Bernie was a crew chief for the Saline team at Le Mans. And he said it was just amazing to see that. Is it snowing? No, it's not snowing here. It's nice. Actually, the sun's out today. I can't predict what you want, Richard. The initial hard hit part throttle is likely due to restriction of all 4 to 8 butterfly IR layout, increased port velocity in the IR. Euro trip. There we go. That dude knows what it is. Scotty doesn't know. And that was Matt Damon was singing, which was awesome. He looked like it freezes. I'm not cold at all. Got my fuzzy on. Half Chevy trucks running 4-bangers with turbos. I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Euro trip reference. That's right. Can I see your Fromers? Oh, let's see. You made out with your sister. ITB smooth out the idle with a big cam due to pulses being separated between cylinders. Sun ran ITBs on the RB26 DTs and on the SR20s. And they did that. They did individual throttle blades on those, but still had a common plenum on those, right? Be a lot cooler if you'd had big block stuff. If I had a low buck truck, big block cam. The question is way above my pay grade. Slide valves fell off of popularity because the blades tend to end up sticking under high vacuum. Have you tried any air filters that don't suck on IR manifolds? What they normally do, because they use IR manifolds in trophy trucks, and what they do is they have this big plenum like I'm talking about and a big panel filter, because that where they're racing, there's, it's just nothing but dust. And so they have a big panel filter that doesn't restrict it. You just have to size it for the airflow needs. Don at DCI Power Pontiac a while back talked about pressure recovery and intake ports on gear changes. I never understood the appeal of ITB outside of an extra induction noise. Have you seen gains from ITBs from actually good intake manifold? Yeah, I have. We picked up a lot of power going from a Honda manifold, which is a P30, a B16 intake manifold, or a Type R, to an IR manifold. And the IR manifold was worth a lot, particularly when we put the injectors in front of the stacks and then had more charge going. It made a lot of power like that. I never understood the appeal of ITBs. Okay, there we go. The Honda guys do quick change engine blocks at the drag races. Yeah, you got to just fix whatever you break, right? What effects can idling more? Is it LSA or overlap? Trying to spec a cam for a 3.3 on an LS with 220 ASCAS heads, but want to idle smooth and not lumpy. Well, you're not changing one thing when you change either one of those. Typically, cams that idle well don't have a lot of overlap, but you can adjust that. You can have what guys would call a tight LSA, but if you have low duration, then you would not have overlap. Water breakdown can't exactly simulate, to my knowledge, all actual gear changes and instant RPM drops the engine experiences installed in a car. I know, but we're not talking about gear changes. We talked about that. We talked about when that would be beneficial, but after the gear change, the power curve is not dictated by an individual throttle setup, like I talked about it. I kind of thought I went through all that. Should I stick with high impedance injectors for a street if the goal were 1,000? It doesn't matter as long as your injector is set up with the proper injector drivers. That's the important thing. Match the injector impedance to the injector driver, and you're fine. Always want to drive a pre-selector transmission in a road race car at the Oil Down Nationals. I've heard many different similar theories from engine builders and cylinder head porters. Getaway, what's going on? But his sister was pretty hot. She was that was the same thing that they do in all the movies where they put baggy clothes on her or whatever, and put glasses on her, and then she's not that. Is that the large brick filter I see often on a V8 drift car application? I don't know. I haven't seen the drift stuff. An example would be drag racing with a Muncie 4-speed, true power shifting engine maxed out at 7,000 RPM, foot on the gas, don't lift. But if you're at wide open throttle, then why are we having a discussion on individual throttle blades? Because now it's not an individual throttle blade anymore. If you're at wide open throttle, you're at wide open throttle. And the individual throttle blade has no effect on that at wide open throttle. That's all just the intake design. Oh, Richard, what is the max lift you can realistically run on LS, assuming you have tons of piston to valve clearance, different valve angle, and pistons clearance on a solid roller? I don't know. I don't know that there would be a limitation until you got to, I don't know, a retainer to seal, but you could fix that with more valve length. So I don't know what max lift would be. And the thing that I'd be concerned with is you're gonna have to have a cylinder head that would want to be at, I mean, guys have run, if you look at Spinal Tap, the one that Ben did, I think that there was an inch 100 or an inch 200 on their deal, but you obviously have to set it up. And would you be better off getting most of that lift with a different rocker or a cam? I don't know. I don't know what you're trying to do. I'd have to step back and look at whatever big picture you're trying to do rather than a kind of a generic question. Specifically, injectors can't be lower ohms that drivers are capable of, say with speaker systems. Yeah, you can't run a low ohm on a high ohm driver, but you can do the reverse of that. Those big boy injectors aren't linear at first. I've never had big injectors idle well. I've only ever had one car with individual throttle bodies, and that was a BMW M6. Yeah. Are push rods, strong valve springs, and good harmonic dampers all you need to go 7,500 on a 5.3? The damper, we go to 7,500 a lot on a stock damper. So we've done that a lot on the L33. The best thing for high RPM is the cam profile, is you have a stable cam profile. And then you will need something more than a stock valve spring to do that. But the spring frequency has to be matched to the camshaft, and you want a stable cam profile. 7,500 is easy with lots of different things though on a 5.3. What's the diameter of individual throttle bodies? It depends on what combination you're talking about. That's double the area of a 102 millimeter throttle body with the low throttle body control. Yeah, Thomas, that can be a problem. First of all, syncing all of the individual throttle bodies can become a problem so that they all open at exactly the same point. And it's way more critical at that transition off of idle into let's say 4 or 5% throttle angle or TPS. But after that, it's not an issue. It becomes less of an issue because it's a big percentage in flow change when we're not opening the same. Once you get them to open the same, it can be touchy. Pressure recovery, the engine sees loaded down again. Richard pulling against the next highest gear in transition and working against vehicle aerodynamics, drag at speed. I know, but BNR, you're not the things that you're talking about are not the things that I'm talking about. The individual throttle blades have no effect on the stuff that you're talking about there. I guess I'm just asking mechanically, what are the limitations? Because it doesn't seem that there are too many. You can put whatever size cam you want on an LS. Obviously, a 1 point, more than an inch of lift has been done. So you could do that. You could do obviously a lot less, but more lift doesn't necessarily gain you anything. So it's not like a 700 lift cam is going to be better than a 600 lift cam. You don't know if that's the case. You don't know if the rest of the things will want to work with that. So everything else has to go with a camshaft. IR just a massive source of air, wide open throttle. Always had bad luck with a Rochester 220 and Mega Squirt. It really turned me off to them. Oh, the 220 injectors. I guess because the Ellis rocker is so short, you have too much rocker to scrub at higher lift. Runner on stack on top of a stack to increase runner length at different RPMs. That's what Mazda did, and that's what Formula One used to do. And if it was available, the forms of racing would do that. So they would slide. They had a sliding trumpet basically, and you would slide the trumpet based on RPM, and also not just like high RPM and low RPM. They would in Formula One anyway. I don't know if Mazda did this. I don't know. I haven't seen any data on that, but I know in Formula One, they would slide the trumpets because what you'd get at different trumpet lengths is you'd get the power curve would be an S-shaped power curve. And so what they would do, and then you'd change the length, and then the sine wave would shift over basically. And so you'd have humps in a different area. And what they want was all humps. They wanted the tops of everything. So they would actually cycle the thing back and forth during the acceleration. So it wouldn't just be long at low RPM and short at high RPM. It would actually be pulsing, which is, again, really, really cool. An advantage much in every way. Nissan did it in there. I disagree with that, Dean. I don't think it is an advantage in every way. I think that the advantage is this much in the way that we talked about earlier. Don hates IR Pontiac V8s. He wants a huge Plenum area. Okay. People have individual preferences too. So I understand that somebody that has liked something or doesn't like something, it is not necessarily an absolute. It could be just, for them. They're like we talk about, there are guys that like Boss 302s. There are guys that like DZ 302s. You can argue about which one of those you like more, but it's just a personal preference thing. Maybe bypass throttle blades. Yeah, you could do that. One of the ways that they improved the drivability, like on the ZR1, was they had a very tiny blade that opened up for, smooth driving around, and then the other blades would open up and, give you more power. So you could do that. Like a blade within a blade would be kind of cool. Big injectors can idle well if there are better ones like the Bosch EV14s. I had Bosch EV14s idle better than Denso factory injectors that were half as big. And stack injection looks cool. It does. Somebody mentioned about an inline 600. It does look cool. Like that's why I had Weber's on my 240Z or 260Z. Only certain locations at Amazon on strike, mostly drivers. Okay. Vintage Crowder IR, big block Chevys are awesome. Oh, definitely. And they even varied the stack lengths for the different cylinders because they had the good and the bad ports on them. Amazon warehouse is not busy. Nothing cooler than mechanical injection on a drag and drive. Nothing harder to make work. How do you know if you have a good cam profile, and how do you know if the springs match? You have to talk to the cam manufacturer about that. And hopefully you talk to a cam manufacturer that has a Spintron data on their camshaft. Like if you're doing an LS, talk to the guys at BTR. But 7500 is not hard at all. We run junkyard motors at 7500 all the time. I didn't realize spinal tap over an inch of lift. Yeah, and they had, Mike, they obviously had giant cylinder heads and all the things that they needed to, and lots of obviously duration, because they're running that thing to, I don't know what it was, 11,000 RPM or something. But they're also trying to make a lot of power too. If I can't make my Denali compliant with the turbo, then we have to switch up to focusing strictly on race truck. There you go. The new Z06 has variable intake runner manifold. Did they vary the runner length on it? That car has a lot of cool stuff. Jimmy and I were just talking about that. I still want somebody to put gear in it and go faster than 233. And then now we want people to put tire and some suspension stuff on it and go to a prep track. That car will go way deeper than a 950. Individual throttle blades with help with off idle part throttle response, because the air velocity change occurs directly at the port without change in flow direction. Okay, that's good. I'm rolling. Scrolling. If you have heads capable of 250 CFM per cylinder, you have to have individual throttle blades capable of 250 or more. Yeah, more would be better. A lot of times what guys will do is when they flow the head, they'll also put the intake manifold on there and see if the intake manifold reduces the head flow. I'd like to see actual dyno data of what that did, if they had one that restricted a little bit, that didn't restrict it at all, and then one that possibly improved it, like, or where you had an intake manifold that flowed 300 CFM or an intake manifold that flowed 250 CFM where the head still flowed 250 CFM. I'd like to see a test of that to see what that did. Was it worth anything? Is the head still the restriction and it didn't care about the intake, assuming that we kept the diameter and runner length the same? I'd be curious to see that. I'm surprised we don't see ITBs on LSs, at least not more often. It doesn't have the same gain as a Honda. I mean, I have run ITB manifolds on them, and I think the problem with ITBs on street motors, not just LSs, but any street motor, is air cleaners are problematic. And then also the initial off idle transition can be touchy on these things, and getting them to like work right. Check out Keglon. I saw some kind of black Roadster deal with copper stack injection and copper valve covers. Yeah, that copper looking wheels. That's cool. Stack injection and methanol. Yeah, there used to be a lot of drag guys back in the day running that. Probably the most successful privateer in Australian V8 Group A sports today in the 90s was using slide valve individual throttle bodies. Cool. And outpowering factory teams using twin throttle plenums. Would you be comfortable with 100 to 125 shot on a 462 valve? Yes. Don't know much about this project. Nice to see how they run. I seen Richard's videos all these years ago. It does look cool on the motor, though, doesn't it, Obituary? Stack iron mechanical, constant flow, barrel valve layout. I've seen barrel valves too. Porsche used to have barrel valves. Finally drove the supercharged Sentra. The tune is definitely not the same as a turbo. Won't let me rev past 4,000. Individual throttle bodies allow you to adjust airflow to each cylinder or synchronize them. So how are you? I've done unisinks on Weber carburetors and on throttle bodies, but you're doing that. That's idle. Once you're at wide open throttle, you're not adjusting anything. I mean, you could close the blade to restrict airflow to one, but you'd just be making less power. So the thing that you're talking about, that's only an idle sync thing. Plenum volume is variable and not the runners. I thought that that's what it was. I didn't know that they had sliding trumpets on it. They did put multiple runner lengths inside. I can't remember how it adjusts. Larry Perkins, for those that are interested, also just about all two-stroke watercraft use ITBs before electronic injection became mainstream. Plenum has 3 valves in it that open based on RPM and demand. Yeah, multiple plenum volumes has been done a lot for a long time. Can you list all the LT model engines? The LY6 is not an LT. That's an LS. When my K24DE head was flow tested, we picked up 5 CFM with a 50 millimeter ITB attached, all ported to work together. And a head will always flow better if you have a radius entry on the head. So most people flow it like we do it with a clay entry, or Brzezinski has entries that they did that you do minor clay and transition for various different. They do it for LSs that have done them for big blocks and small blocks and all kinds of stuff. And so he made those so that when you flow them, that we all flow with a similar fixture. A lot of times you'll just do a clay entry and then it's just a rounded entry because you don't want a sharp edge to flow into. It flows way less like that. And so the same thing is if you put a stack on it, and you can see that when you do an exhaust flow also, when it's exiting that way, whether you have a pipe on it or not, definitely changes the flow rate of the cylinder head. The Helmholtz resonance intake plenum. Yeah, that's just varying the plenum volume. Stack injection nitro. A lot of guys did that back in the day. Any more testing on the adjustable intake manifolds? I haven't tested any adjustable intake manifolds for a while. Would a sliding trumpet be just a trombone? A trombone is not sliding the air entry though. There is a spot on a big block Chevy to prime oil with a pressurized jug. I know spin the pump with something is best. I don't have that. I've never tried doing it that way. But yeah, you could. There's lots of. There's the place where we take the oil pressure from, right on the back of the block. You could take that out, and if you have a pressurized source, you could pressurize that. Have you ever seen the split runner off the intake manifolds? I have. My fuel pressure gauge wasn't working, so I'll fix that. Low lift flows have reduced restriction with port on port induction. The head loss is reduced with 4 or 6 or 8 throttle bodies each. Low lift flows have reduced restriction with port. What do you mean port on port induction? So tell me how a stack injection of the same size and shape is going to change the lift of the head versus a common plenum manifold that has the same port. I don't understand how that's a thing. What's the difference between LS and LT? The LT is not more refined. I mean, it's a later version of the motor. I guess you could say it's more refined. I don't know that that's the way I would describe it. But the big difference is an LT motor is direct injected and the LS motors are port injected. A lot of the LT motors have variable cam timing too. Stack intake on a big block 454 under the hood of a Corvette would look cool. There was a mid-year Corvette big block at West Tech that had a cross ram stack injection on it because it fit under the hood. The problem is that where it's grabbing air is valve cover, header, hot area there. Looked awesome though. Richard, if you already said so, sorry, but the Hillborn is very on-off, good throttle response. Have you ever played around with old Jag inline sixes? I haven't ever run one of those. What are the cons of ported 821s to stock 821s on 1100 horse centrifugal blower 416? I'm going from a heavily ported 821 LSX version 821 and debating not getting them ported. I don't think that the ported heads are going to hold you back at 1100 horsepower. I think you could easily make that with the right blower on there. Mike is saying that the LT motor also has the aluminum block is significantly stronger than the LS. When I did flow nets with the city water engineer at community college, he said the number of flow drops or the number of flow paths, the total reduction in flow. Dean, that's not answering the question. My question is, once the blade is open, how does a stack injection change the flow rate of the head any differently than a common plenum that would have the same runner? The answer is that it doesn't. Without the core shift issue of the LS aluminum block, for the price, I prefer a big belt on the front of the motor. That's just me. Oh, so you want a supercharger on there that cures the stack injection problem? I have to Google it. Some are called LT. Well, some engines have the LT architecture but are different. L93 comes to mind. Not sure why and what about the naming convention. Yeah, an L83 is still the LT engine family. It just has a different name. Not every LS engine family has an LS name. It's not an LS1 or LS2 or LS3. You have LY6s and LR4s and LM7s and all those, but they're all generally part of the LS family. Regardless of the tuning complications, I love the ITBs on my Turbo GTIR Pulsar. Very cool. We solve idle issues by removing a nest of vacuum tubes and idle air bypass junk. The drive-by-wire conversion. Cool. A drive-by-wire on an ITB thing is a really good choice. I think you could cure a lot of that with having the computer do it. What's the best year for a big block? It would actually depend on what you're trying to do. Catch you later. I had to finish replacing air brakes, shoes, and drums out back on a Peterbilt. That's just a job getting the wheels and tires and stuff off. Do they use it? Do you guys use a hoist or something to get those off? Larry was able to get his own head casting and high ported and epoxied them. Oh, engine's in the truck already. There should be another one on the side by the oil filter also. Yeah, Mark, if you could get a distributor, then you could just cannibalize that and make the drive yourself. The heads are completely different on the LT. They are. The valve orientation's different. Port on port and independent runner are the same thing. Can of valves on the LT is the big improvement. Do the flow net diagram, the single intake throttle body versus port on port restricts total flow because of the number of flow drops. A lot of the port is designed to help atomize the fuel. DI uses the high pressure and high temperature to help atomize the fuel. Yeah, Ben, I don't know if there would be an advantage to putting the valve up higher. I mean, then we're just moving it out to kind of where it, the distance away from, and I would think that, and I think most guys would argue that that would reduce the response rate if you move that stack, if you move the blade farther up the stack. DI uses a high pressure. Okay, we got that. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, Deb, do all that. On the side toward the back above the oil filter might be simple enough. Yeah, I don't know what you have access to with it being in the vehicle with the exhaust there and stuff. If I'm without 85, my area is water meth on pump gas going to work similarly. No, it's not going to make nearly as much power, but you can help with detonation suppression with the water methanol injection. On my previous question, the Port 821s, I'm already set up at almost 1100 tire, but I need to change my head. Wondering if I'll regret not porting the new head. Your power will be down, but I still think you could get to that number. You might have to spin the blower a little faster. Do you know how much the ported heads flow, Andrew? Pulse tuning and each port is not at vacuum would be the benefit. Have you done a dyno of the Truck North LT 5.3 cam? I don't know if I did. I'd have to look at the information. I haven't tested it at West Tech, but Brian's run a bunch of tests on those, but I don't remember if I did a video on it or not. I just saw a couple of guys who designed a race air compression induction system. Do you mean the compressed air supercharging stuff? That works good. It's just, there are problems with, not problems, but you have to have big air tanks, obviously, to make it work. But it's very, very effective. What are the benefits of moving the injector further up the runner rather than the butterfly up the runner? Moving the injector adds charge cooling, but moving the throttle blade doesn't do that. Good thing I can buy non-E85 at a local gas station. How's our poll doing here? Is there a benefit from individual throttle blades on a stack injection versus a common plenum? 65% saying yes. When I was 17, Larry Perkins said something really profound. 460 horsepower at 6,700 beats 462 horsepower at 6,900. That was 1987. I always remember that. That is what IR and port do. So the difference between them is 2 horsepower, and one makes power earlier in RPM range because it has a different runner length and has a different power curve. I don't think that that's what we're talking about. That's not the question I'm asking about port versus or a common plenum versus a stack injection. With a well-designed manifold to wash it wide open throttle, look at the new Coyote for a masterclass in common plenum design. It's multiple chambers to boost mid-range torque. That's something that a common plenum or multiple common plenums that are linked can do that IR can't do. Is it an IR only has an infinite plenum? And with a plenum volume, you can induce Helmholtz resonance, and with multiple ones, you can induce it at different RPM ranges. I don't know that ultimately, like I said, every time I've ever run stack injection on anything and compared it to having a plenum versus not having a plenum, it's almost always made more power not having the common plenum on there. Now, I don't know if that was an airflow restriction of the single opening necessarily. Maybe could have been that. Maybe it was the power difference was there was a power difference through the whole RPM range, which makes me think that this is not an airflow device. It's not an airflow specific problem, that it is a resonance tuning thing. And so we, like we said, I've seen that do that. And I don't know if that's I have to do more testing to isolate that to figure out what's going on. But there was no change in, the stack part of it was all the same in both those tests. It was just a plenum and no plenum, because that's the kind of thing that I'm looking at is what happens when you have a common plenum versus not having a common plenum. And then what happens, like just the blade position is kind of the thing that I'm talking about. Other people here seem to be talking about completely different intake designs, which if you change the intake design, you definitely can change the power. You can do that regardless of what type you're picking. A single plane, a dual plane, whatever, you can always do that. I don't know the flow in my current setup. It seems heavily ported. My tests seem to show us pulling oil through the cast of the head by the spring seat. It's not going through past the guide or the seal. Picked up the LSX 821 heads. I'm going to use LSA injectors on my E85 Flex LS6. I want to have them resized before installed. What do you mean by have them resized? Are you going to have them? Are you going to have them decapped? If you do, if you have them decapped, they're not all going to flow the same. So I would be leery of that. Even if I don't need it all. Have you seen a guy who several years ago built a custom ITB setup for his LS2 that went on a Manta Mirage? I haven't. The Speedmaster stuff has been available for a long time, and they've had the downdraft setup and cross ram setups. And Tom, the guy that I was talking to you about that did the slide valve stuff, also built a cross ram for the injection that we were working with, a company that, and I think Borla owns it now, but they look like DCOE Webers, but they had fuel injection inside of them. They work pretty well. But he made an intake manifold to run those on it. And so they were injecting the fuel upstream of where the fuel normally is injected, like right at the head port. And so those made good power. The combination of the total runner length and adding fuel where we were adding fuel stuff, the intake manifold was pretty impressive. Yeah, Jet, Hillborn stuff can be problematic, particularly if it's mechanical injection. Throttle response looks of ITB is hard to beat. Maybe you can do a podcast on GM Northstar engine. I don't have any experience with a Northstar engine. Scrolling. Some make 300 horsepower and DTS trim. However, with the right setup and head bolt and cam piston, they can handle up to 500. I think Tina has 3 tanks in the truck. Carbon fiber. To the best of my testability, it seems like it's pulling through the casting. So the casting's porous, or does it have a crack in it, Andrew? They say the compressed air setup is easy to plumb. The air going into is crazy cold. It's really cold. It's below zero. When they did the dyno testing at West Tech on that compressed air supercharger, they were doubling the power output of the NA motor at 7 pounds. Dean, and I understand what you're saying about having more average power production for a road race car is a good idea. I can understand that. But my question is what you're attributing it to. It doesn't seem right to me. When I have my 350 Pontiac going, I would have loved to do ITBs, mostly for looks. Only thing I want to know about a North Star is if I can just drill through the heads for bigger bolts for the same effect as a custom stud kit. IR gets exactly the same atmospheric pressure every valve event. There's no common plenum that could match that. For example, the front 2 cylinders have the air for the other 6 flying past. So you think that the airflow in the plenum is reducing the airflow to each of the cylinders because of that? The guy on YouTube is building one to take boost. That's probably Calvin. He was putting together a North Star. If you had to pick one single car to pre-70s to do an LS swap, what would it be? Well, there's lots of good stuff from the muscle car era. My first car was a 70 Camaro, so I probably would pick that because that's, holds a special place in my heart. I was on a Jet Funny Car team back in the day. Some old ITB racers had injectors before blades, but only good at wide open throttle. Richard, would you say the 4500 single plane LS intake manifold is still the king? Still the king of what? I don't know what you mean by thoughts, Brandon. Remember, the head bolts on a North Star engine also have small holes in them to flow oil. The head bolt on the North Star is hollow. Why are they flowing oil through that? What are they? Are they oiling something to the top with that? They're not draining oil back into the. No, because that could only go into water, right? What are they using to oil that with? Would there be value in LS swapping a 3rd gen Camaro? The value would be personal. It'd be individual. That's only, do you think that there's value in it? At a 78 Z28 and 85? Yeah, the oiling the rocker arms through a head bolt. There would be different. Yes, slight pressure at the runner. Okay. I think people visualize what's happening in an intake manifold differently than I do. Starters under the intake. What about crosstalk 5 and 7? Well, we've done that when we do cam changes with changing the firing order. You think if that was something that you would change the power, but when we change the firing order, that doesn't really come into play unless we're changing it to another 2 and then we're getting exactly the same power. And on that note, it is time to go. See, I knew that this would be a good one. I knew that people would have like lots of opinions about this. And on that note, it is time to go, but I will be back tonight.